Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Was saying that want to look at the spread of Islam in Africa, and but from the Muslim perspective, a lot of times what we get is a narration by Oriental historians or non-Muslim historians, whether they're African American, Caucasian, whatever the case may be, and want to take a look at what did Muslim historians have to say about the expansion of Islam and when it takes place. And we also want to take a look at how we can increase our knowledge to deal with certain questions or certain things said about Islam that always come up. And we can give specific examples in doing so. So, for example, if someone said to you, as far as they were concerned, Islam was spread by the sword, what would you say to them? And we're speaking about Africa or anywhere else in the advent of Islam, that Islam was taken or spread by the sword. What would your answer be? Anyone can respond.
I would say no.
You would say no. Okay. Brother Mikhail, anybody else?
No.
No. Okay. Brother Tahi?
I'll say yes and no.
You say yes and no. Ah, okay. Interesting. Anyone else?
I would say no, but later down the line, I think it was some sword, because Islam started changing.
Okay. All right. Anyone else want to contribute? All of you are right, but Brother Tawheed is probably the most correct in what he said. Yes and no.
Yeah.
So Brother Tawheed, why would you gave the answer yes or no? Why would you say yes and no?
Because there was violence in the religion, and in certain situations,
Yeah.
it caused for war.
Okay.
So, Islam, we believe, as Allah tells us, that there's no compulsion, and we're not the aggressor. But
Right.
Fight, if they want to fight us, then we're gonna fight back.
Okay.
And we just deliver the word. We say La ilaha illallah. If they accept, then good. If they don't accept, it's also good.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, you, in a nutshell, very good response. Very correct too. But let's look at some other aspects of it. The Prophet dies in 632, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so within the less than 53 years, most of what we call the Middle East and the Levant was taken by the Muslims. Okay, and so one of the first things that you notice is that these areas that the Muslims conquered and occupied and held on to, they were the minority. They weren't the majority. So one of the fallacies we want to deal with and put to rest is this idea that Western historians give, that this horde of angry, very inspired Muslims break out of the Arabian Peninsula and just overrun everything in their sight. And at the same time of doing it, force people, quote unquote, to become Muslim. We know this is not true, but we want to know, if we get into a discussion, be able to say why it's not true. What was recorded during the time that points to the fact No, that's not what happened. Okay? And it's not to say that the expansion of the Ummah under the Khalifa Rashidun, under the reigns of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, that the expansion of the Ummah didn't take place. It took place during their time and after their time. But the question becomes, were these wars to force people, as Brother Tawheed very excellently put, to force people to become Muslim? Because the ayat, as he was correct in the Quran in translation, there's no compulsion in religion. In this particular instance, for real, you can't make someone become Muslim or tell them that if you don't become Muslim, I'm going to cut your head off or take your children away from you or abuse the women in your family or anything like this. So he's absolutely right in that. Okay. So if we before we get to the aspect about Africa, I'll point this out. When the Muslims decided moved into Syria, and just to jog everybody's memory, if we had to use the term superpower, but I wouldn't really apply it to that point at the time, but at the time that Islam comes, the revelation of the Quran comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and all during the time that the Muslims are battling for their survival in the Arabian Peninsula, there are in the region two empires seemingly stronger than any others. One is the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire as it's called, the Persian Empire. And the other one is the Byzantines. Now, that word Byzantine, does anybody know where that word comes from? And who are the Byzantines? And even if you take the time to look it up, there's no problem, because I want this to be very interactive. I want us to exchange thoughts and ideas during the time that we're together. So who were the Byzantines? Who were these people? Where were they from? What had they been part of at one time?
Roman Empire. Of course, I'm looking at it.
Okay, okay, no problem. Okay, yes. But which part of the Roman Empire?
The Eastern Roman.
Eastern Roman Empire. Okay. Now, let me put something out for you to keep in your mind and take a note of. The year 476 current era is really important in the history of the world.
I need to write this down.
Anybody know why? I want to look up what happens in 476 that is very traumatic as far as the world is concerned at that time.
Mm.
476 current era.
76.
Does it have anything to do with Christianity?
In a way, it does. In a way, it does. Okay.
Of America, like part of the Roman stuff, like the rules in America, or how America came about with its rules.
No, this is way, Sister Miriam, way before.
Yeah, that's way before. Yeah.
Way before America.
Okay. All right. Okay. What happened in 476 that is very important is that the Western Roman Empire comes to an end. Roman Empire is made up of two parts, Eastern and Western. The Western Roman Empire, which contains Rome itself, is overrun by Slavic people coming out of basically Eastern Europe. And the Western Roman Empire comes to an end. And for Western Europe The end of the Western Roman Empire signals what they will call in time the Dark Ages. It becomes a period of feudalism, individual barons, rulers, and it takes a long time before it coalesces into what we understand Europe to be today. But the Eastern Roman Empire survives. Its capital is Constantinople,
Mhm.
named after the Emperor Constantine, one of its most noted rulers.
Mhm.
But one of the things to take a look at is that they were called the Byzantines because before the capital of the place was Byzantium. Constantine changed the name to Constantinople, the city of Constantine, or the capital of Constantine. But before that happened, it was known as Byzantium. And that name stuck. Even though Constantine changes the name to Constantinople, they're constantly referred to as the Byzantines. And the important thing about the Byzantines, as we'll see later on, is that they're Christian. But can somebody tell me what type of Christians they were?
Mm.
What type of Christians the Byzantines were?
Orthodox.
Greek.
I just heard somebody say, I heard Orthodox from Brother Mikhail, and I heard somebody
Yeah.
who said Greek. Okay, good. All right, alhamdulillah. Greek Orthodox, which put them at odds with what was happening in Rome, because what do we have in Rome at this time? It's still with us to this very day.
Roman Catholic.
Roman Catholics, right. So you have us here, two opposing views, two opposing practices of Christianity. Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, and they don't like each other at all, okay, at all. So when a delegation comes to, so how does the conquest start? Because we know immediately after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, as far as Islam is concerned, we have the wars of apostasy. The Prophet ﷺ dies, and a lot of the tribes in the Arabian Peninsula that have come into Islam decide our agreement was with the Prophet ﷺ, not with Allah, but with the Prophet. He's dead. So we don't have to abide by this anymore.
Mhm.
Okay? And this happens with Abu Bakr. And what is it that he does? It comes in the aspect of about the zakat. He sends individuals to pay the zakat, and the tribes that have said that they won't, that they're no longer bound by the covenant of the Shahada, excuse me, say, we're not paying. And Abu Bakr says, I'm going to get the zakat even if I have to take it. So this is a fight for survival of the Ummah, as well as you have a false priestess and you have Musalama the liar, who mount threats against the Ummah. And Abu Bakr is successful. He has such people as Amr ibn al-As, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Khalid ibn Walid, individuals like this who are leading the Muslim troops, especially Khalid ibn Walid and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. But while all this is going on, toward the end of that, a delegation comes from Syria. And they say to Abu Bakr, because the Byzantines were very oppressive, extremely oppressive, taxation, just a whole lot of different things that oppress the people. And a delegation comes to Abu Bakr and asks him, could the Muslims do anything about their circumstances. And Abu Bakr says, inshallah, we can. Well, what else do you think that Abu Bakr told them after he said that? What do you think he said to them? Think about it. Put yourself back in that time. You're Abu Bakr. These people come to talk to you about giving them assistance to end Byzantine oppression. You say
Right.
the possibility exists that we can, that you can, inshallah. But what else would you tell them after having told them that? What would you tell them?
They have to fight for it.
Yeah.
Huh?
Earn
got-
it. Fight for it.
Okay, what else? That's correct. What else
You-
would you say?
You gotta be.
Align
You
with
gotta. You gotta believe in one God.
Okay. Not quite. Okay.
they need to align with the
Because
Muslims.
don't forget, no compulsion in religion. Brother Tawheed was right. But even in the light of that, what would you think Abu Bakr would have said to them?
It's going to cost them.
Awesome. Yeah.
It will cost them in time, but what else is there?
Get to follow our rules.
Say that again.
Follow our rules,
You're getting close. You're getting close.
our laws.
Okay, you're getting closer and closer. You're burning up right now. You're so
They
close.
didn't, Darnita.
Huh?
They didn't hear you the last time.
Oh, I said to align with the Muslims. That's what I said.
To ally with the Muslims.
Yeah.
Expand that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Let me think. I was thinking on the line of what Brother Tawheed and the other brother said, but I guess like align with them and basically like follow our rules. Basically,
Okay.
basically we take the lead and you're following us.
Okay. In a way, a big way, you're absolutely right. What he says to them is understand, if we are successful in ending the oppression of the Byzantines, the political structure that you will have to live under will be Islam and its rules, as you just said. Now notice, he didn't say to them that they had to become Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if we are successful, inshallah, Islam will be the political reality in which you will live. And then he went on to explain what that meant. That anyone who wanted to become Muslim could become Muslim. Anyone who didn't would pay the tax called the jizya, spelled Jizya. Jizya, the jizya, okay? And this tax, just imagine, you're, just for a minute anyway, you're in Damascus or Hims or Homs in Syria, and Muslims come. You have no idea what to expect from them, from the Muslim troops coming. But the first thing you notice, as Brother Tawheed alluded to, there's no raping, there's no pillaging, there's no destroying of property or anything. And this is a shock in and of itself. And then it's explained to them,
No, I'm
you
on
don't
Zoom.
have to become Muslim,
Mhm.
but you will have to pay a tax called a jizya. And the jizya basically, they put them under Muslim protection in a very special category, because these individuals are Christian. And if they're Christian, as far as Islam concerned, they're people of the what?
Of the book.
They're people of the book, which means they're entitled to Muslim protection. And so the jizya is paid. It allows for them to keep, as long as they're not rebelling against the political reality of living under Islam, They're allowed to continue to worship as Christians. They are any land that's underneath the plow, allowed to keep. They can keep their churches. They can go on living as being Christians. As being Christians, okay? And this is what Abu Bakr told them. And the delegation that came to see him were fine with that. And so, long story short, the Muslims take Syria from the Byzantines. Okay, the major battle that took place, there were several, but the one that ended the Byzantine control of Syria and put it under the banner of Islam was the Battle of Yarmouk, Y-A-R-M-U-K, the Battle of Yarmouk. Okay, and so the same thing replicates itself when the Muslims take down the Persian Empire. Same conditions given. Okay, and it works. By and large, the people who come under the political sway of Islam are pretty satisfied. Pay the jizya. They don't have to serve in the Muslim military. They can keep their property. They can worship as they wish. And so in this environment, it takes some time, but this is the things that begin to attract people to Islam in terms of in these conquered areas. Because overall, the Muslims are fair with them. There are problems that the Muslims will have amongst themselves, but in terms of the people who were part of Syria and this and Persia, then we know, that they adjusted very well. And so one thing to be sure of here is to let you know, Syria here at the time was called Ash-Shams, A-S-S-H-A-M-S. Damascus was its capital. Other major cities, but Damascus was its capital. And just some side notes about Damascus. The Damascus is the oldest city in terms of human habitation, of people living within the confines of Damascus. Human record there longer, more so than anywhere else. And the present day countries of, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, this was all what was Shams, or another word for phrase, Greater Syria. And when we look at, on the other hand, in the east, present-day Iraq and Iran and a couple of other places made up the Persian Empire. Okay? So that's the basis here. So we know right off the bat, Islam, back to what Brother Tawheed said, yes and no. Yes. Did Muslims conquer territory? Yes, they did. No doubt. And politically, when they conquered the area, the political reality of which the people were going to live in changed, and it became Islam. But at the same time, no, it wasn't spread by the sword, as Brother Tawheed and others pointed out, because people weren't forced to become Muslim. They could pay the jizya and live without any problems. And by and large, this is what happened. Okay, any questions before we move on? Okay, let me ask you another question here. Your opinion. Is Egypt, if you lived in Egypt right now, would you consider yourself to be African or Arab?
African.
African.
I think today.
No, wait, notice what I said.
Today would be.
Just to be sure. if you lived in Egypt right now, was Egyptian, okay, if you were Egyptian, would you consider yourself to be Arab or African?
African.
Arab. Arab. You would be Arab.
Now
Nobody,
would be Arab.
nobody wants to identify with Africa.
Exactly.
That's true.
Okay, all right. So now, if I was asking you what you think of Egypt being, well, yeah, Egypt is part of Africa. And if you live in Egypt and you're on the African continent, you're African, okay?
Mhm.
But the reality is, some Egyptians do see themselves as African. I haven't met that many of them, but by and large, they consider themselves to be Arab,
Mhm.
okay? And there's a reason for that. It doesn't change the fact that they still are on the continent of Africa, okay? And in that sense, would be seen as being African, okay? So, I'm mentioning Egypt because Egypt is the first African country we're going to look at that Islam spreads into. Now, somebody is going to say North Africa. North Africa comes in time, but it doesn't come before the Muslim introduction into Egypt. Okay? And we're going to look at, before we leave today, what happened in Kush, okay, which is Nubia. You know, what happened there? You know, because there's an attempt by the individuals, the Muslim army that is conquering Egypt, waging, you know, war in Egypt to conquer Nubia as well to the south, which is like currently present-day Sudan, the area covered by present-day Sudan. So we want to take a look at that because this is the first place that the political structure in Africa, in one country in Africa, changes that we see. Okay. Now, how much do you all know about Egypt? I mean, why was Egypt so attractive? Why did different nations throughout antiquity attempt to conquer or control Egypt? What was it about Egypt that made it so attractive to outside forces?
The Nile River and spices.
The Nile River and?
Spices, I believe. Frankincense or something.
You're onto it. Not only just spices.
That's what's in the ground.
The knowledge, the information, and the culture.
Yeah, but there's something else too, even more basic than that. Brother Mikhail was onto it. I thought he was going to go a little bit farther with it, but he was onto it.
Oh,
Of the landmarks.
Huh?
What about the landmarks, the pyramids and the
Landmarks, okay. Let me ask you a question. If you are living in Egypt, even now or then, there's something that happens every year. If you're a farmer, you
Right.
can't wait for it to happen.
the rain.
Not rain, in
The
a
hemp.
way it is, but it's something else. You can't wait for it to happen because when it happens, it leaves something that allows you to really, really, in more cases than not, have a productive crop.
Oh,
That is that the silk? Is that the silk from that river or something?
You're getting there, Brother Mikhail. Keep going.
I don't
going.
know. I don't know. I don't know.
You're getting there.
I don't know.
One of the reasons that Egypt is so attractive to nations who have the ability to think about conquering Egypt is because of its agriculture. Okay? From the Quran, where did Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers in the narrative about Yusuf, where were they on their way to for what?
for grain and stuff. They were on their way. They were on.
Grain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This has been Egypt's reality for eons. The Nile overflows its banks.
Mhm.
And as Brother Mikhail alluded to, when it recedes, it leaves some of the richest, most fertile soil on the planet. And so many nations, like beginning with Rome, take control of Egypt because Egypt is the breadbasket of the world. It can support not only civilian populations, but armies as well. So, and then as someone else pointed to, the culture, places of communication, until Julius Caesar's entry into Egypt and the battle that takes place that ends up with the destruction of the library at Alexandria. That was one of the worst things that happened in terms of education, because that library at Alexandria held documents, manuscripts, some of them only one of a kind. And when, in the course of the battle at the Moon Gate between forces of Julius Caesar and Queen Cleopatra's brother, which there was like a civil war going on between her and her brother, and Caesar decided to side with Cleopatra. The burning down of that library was a huge loss because it held manuscripts of all types of things concerning science, medicine, mathematics, and things of this nature. But Egypt was attractive primarily because of the amount of food that it produced in terms of grain, oat, wheat, other grains now that, they talk about these ancient grains like aramith and like this. Egypt, these grains were produced in Egypt in great abundance. So as the Muslims are dealing with the Byzantines, their attention turns toward Egypt, which is controlled by the Byzantines. The established religion in Egypt at this time, other than those who still may have held on to the Egyptian gods, was Greek Orthodox Christianity in the guise of Coptic Christians. So can somebody look up who the Coptic Christians were? COPT. If you were a Coptic Christian living at the time, what did you believe? What was the basis of your beliefs?
One God.
Yeah, but something else too. Look them up. Something else too. Okay, don't forget they're Christian.
Mary. Mary.
Hold on. What's that about Mary?
Mary. I kind of forgot all this stuff, but I think it has nothing to do with Mary.
Oriental Orthodox Christian Church based in Egypt, Africa, and the Middle East.
Well, what was their signature trademark about them that made them different from other Christians? Good sister just alluded to the fact. What was the position of Mary with the Coptic Christians? Even though they were considered Orthodox, what was her position within the Coptic Christians?
What? Mother of God?
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah, that's what they call the Mother of God.
Yep. They prayed to her. Okay?
Yeah.
They prayed to her. She had a central role within, for these, they were considered Orthodox, but Mary had a particular role. Coptic Christians still live in Egypt to this very day. They're still there. Okay? And the question becomes, one of the things that you can say to people when they start talking about people being forced to become Muslim, if that was a situation, the Coptic Christians wouldn't have stayed there. They could have left. But Egypt comes under the control of Islam. They could have left. Some did, but the majority stayed. That's why there's still Coptic Christians and their churches in Egypt to this very day. To this very day, they're there. Khalil and I were Allah blessed us to go to Egypt. And while we were there, one of the tours we went on was to one of their churches, their main church. Okay, that was there. Okay, the interesting thing about it is that in going into the confines of the area, what it was, a lot of the women who were Coptics, we actually thought were Muslim because of the way they were dressed. Okay, no difference in that. Okay, and had a chance to talk to some of them, you know, and see a very special place in this particular church. If you've heard about, and we'll talk about it, that when Cairo was taken, you know, there's a place outside of the main Coptic church that the Muslim commander prayed at. And he prayed there because he knew that if he went into the church to perform salat, his soldiers would want to change it into a masjid, and that violated the rules of jihad. So there's a designated place, and they have it marked off and sectioned off the way you can see it. And it says, this is where Amr ibn al-As prayed when Cairo failed to avoid going into the church because of the rules of jihad that allowed that church not to be changed. Okay? So Egypt has a big attraction for a long time. And it had been conquered by successive people. If we go way back into Egyptian times, one of the first people that conquered Egypt were called the Hyksos, Hyskos, Hyksos. They were a Western Central Asian people. And they were able to hold on to Egypt for a while. But they were kicked out. Next there were the Hittites. Hittites, conquered Egypt. And one of the things I want you to realize here is that sometimes in the ancient world, the ability to be able to produce something that somebody else can't means the difference between keeping your freedom or being conquered. Okay? Now, I'm gonna have you all go back a little bit, you know, because we all up there in age a little bit, but go back a little bit. You know, when you were in high school and they talked about the different ages, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, so forth and so on, okay? It's about where these different societies developed the ability to do certain things. So Egypt, bronze civilization. If you looked at an Egyptian soldier at the time, his weapons were made of bronze. He may have carried a sword called a sickle sword, handle, and then the top, the blade shaped like a sickle. Now keep this in mind. What do you think happened to Egyptian soldiers when they ran up, objectively speaking, when they ran up against an opponent, when instead of having weapons made out of bronze, they were made out of iron? Okay? Because this is what gave the Hittites advantage over the Egyptians when they conquered them. The Hittites had developed the ability to produce iron. And they had weapons, sword, spear tips, and that produced from iron. And Egyptian weapons literally couldn't stand up against them. So this happens a lot during the time that we're talking about. Okay? So, Brother Tawheed.
Yes, sir.
If you were going to plan a conquest of Egypt, and you're you've been assigned this because Egypt is conquered during the reign of Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anh. And what do you think the instructions would be that he would give you?
See what their weapons was made of.
Okay, that's one. Brother Mikhail, same question.
I can't begin to think.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sisters,
Probably destroy the land. That would force them to start.
say that again.
They destroy the land. It was
Okay. To destroy it and not destroy it.
to destroy it. Then they make them stop and, we're going to destroy it if we don't do this, that, and the other. Usually there's a,
Okay. Anybody else? Think about who we're talking about. This is Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anh. Okay. And we know his reputation is not only being Khalifa, but being one of the most notable of the Muslims.
Let's see. He's not the one that killed the people because they couldn't speak the language.
No, he's not. No.
Okay. Okay.
Not at all. Okay. Now, Umar's the person. So, if you're keeping notes or looking at it, we want to look at Muslim conquest of Egypt. Okay. It took 7 years to conquer Egypt. Muslims entered in 639, and in 646 is when they finally complete the conquest of Egypt. But remember when I first started, I told you, I said one of the fallacies that Western historians have tried to put out is that, Arabia had this huge population of individuals who, inspired by Islam, rushed out into the world and just pillaged and conquered and did all this kind of stuff. So one of the ways we know this is not true is because Amr ibn al-As, one of the noted of the Sahaba, Amr ibn al-As, he was a noted Sahaba in the Hadith. There are Hadith that have been translated by him if you find in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Amr ibn al-As is the commander. His army, quote unquote, that was with him when they went into Egypt was all of 4,000 men. They're going to conquer the Roman part of Egypt, the part controlled by the Byzantines. But his army is 4,000 men.
Huh? You want the light on?
no.
Okay? Now imagine, we're talking about taking a country,
Only
a
4,000.
country. And the total number of soldiers we have, 4,000.
Sealing this thing.
Okay? 4,000. Now that even means these are some very dedicated soldiers. They know something we didn't know. We still okay, we still don't know. But his army totaled 4,000 men. 4,000. He will later get some extra troops from Umar ibn al-Khattab, but he only has 4,000. And this is what, the next time we meet, I'll give you the names of some of the Muslim historians who talk about this. And so what I'm giving you is things that they've talked about. They talk about the fact there's only 4,000 men. That's not a whole lot of people to be talking about conquering a country.
Not at all.
Not at all. And the Byzantines aren't weak. That's the other thing. Okay? They're not weak. I mean, you going into somebody else's backyard to say, I'm coming here to put you under the political sway of Islam. You got 4,000 troops. Which means One battle goes bad, and it's like bad news. Okay, so got about 5 minutes left, but I want to share this with you because it points to another fact of how we talk about these individuals who try to say Islam was spread by the sword. So when Amr al-As went into Egypt, Umar ibn al-Khattab advised him, do not forget what the Prophet ﷺ has taught us in terms of dealing with people who aren't Muslim. And he reminded him of all the rules of jihad. Okay? There was to be no abuse of the women, stealing, taking property. None of this was to happen. It's not to say that the Muslims wouldn't have access to booty, because two armies fight, there'd be weapons, armor, all kind of stuff if the Muslims won. But even then, it was divided according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in the Quran about how it was to be divided. So Islam gave this framework that allowed for conquest.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Try tapping.
For conquest to take place, but under a strict set of controls. And Umar told Amr ibn al-As, I expect for you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, to follow what the Prophet ﷺ has taught us in dealing with these people who aren't Muslim. Now, the last point. Amr al-As, there's one particular battle that takes place. And this is what, in following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that he did. He gave the opposing forces of the Byzantines at this particular battle. There were three options that were given. He said, one, if you become Muslim, then there won't be a fight. There won't be a battle, because you're no longer an enemy. You are our brothers. That's the first option. He didn't say to them, if you don't become Muslim, we're gonna kill you. That's not what he said. What he said to them was, we offer you the opportunity to become Muslim because this will prevent the battle from taking place. We will no longer be enemies. We'll be brothers in Islam. We encourage you to accept this circumstance, but it's your choice. The second option, we talked about it. He said, if you don't want to do that, pay the jizya, the tax for non-Muslims who became protected of a class, and the class that they fall into as far as the Sharia is concerned, they're called dhimmis, dhimmis. And they also fall in the protection of being Ahl Kitab, the people of the book. He said, and you'll be protected. You won't have to worry about any oppression from us. And then the third option was, if you don't want to do either of these two, then we're not going anywhere. And the battle,
It's 3 o'clock.
And we'll fight. So this was a battle, I'll spell it for you, of Bilbis, capital B as in boy, E-L, B as in boy, E-I-S. Again, capital B as in boy, E-L, B as in boy, E-I-S. The general of the Byzantines at this battle was a general by the name of Arterion, A-R-E-T-I-O-N. Aretion. He got the options, and he allowed himself to be convinced by 2 monks to fight. The governor of Alexandria had sent him a letter saying, I know about the Muslims. Pay the jizya. Don't fight. He told him, pay the jizya. Don't fight. But these 2 monks told Aryan, we should fight. There's only 4,000 of them. Okay? Our army is larger. And they fought. And the Muslims won. And the general who had been told by the ruler of Alexandria, accept the jizya, he was killed in the fighting. Okay? Now, how long had the Byzantines controlled Egypt? The Roman part of Egypt. They took control of Egypt in 30 CE. There was a 10-year period, 618 to 629, when the Persians took control of Egypt from the Byzantines, but in 629, they got it back. So they had held it for a long time, a tremendously long time. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to have happen, they took it. The Muslims, he granted the Muslims victory. But let me ask you another question before we end. Okay? What's another name for Nubia? We're going to take a look at Nubia. What's another name for Nubia? What was Nubia called before it was called Nubia?
Let's see.
What was Nubia called before it was called Nubia? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a K.
Kemet.
Huh?
Kemet.
So Kemet is Egypt.
Egypt.
Okay. Kemet is Egypt. Okay.
Okay.
Kush. Who said Kush?
Kilroy.
I looked it up.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Kush. Now, we have to remember at one time, Kush controlled all of Egypt. There's a period of time covering almost 500 years where the Kushites, as they were called, controlled Egypt, okay? And so what Amr ibn al-As did, he sent his cousin, whose name was Uqba ibn Nafi. Uqba, U-Q-B-A-H, ibn Nafi, N-A-F-I. He sent him to basically say things are changing in Egypt. But ultimately, that expedition didn't go too well. Ultimately, Amr ibn al-As tells his cousin, come back into Egypt. We'll handle Kush later, okay? But why was it that they had a problem? It wasn't because they abused the people. It's simply because the Kushites were excellent soldiers, okay? They were excellent archers, and their cavalry was exceedingly well. And they fought a game of hit and run with the Muslims. The Muslims were known for their cavalry being exceedingly well trained and exceedingly fast. And the Kushite cavalry was better than that. And the archers were extremely well. There's a record from one Muslim historian that says, in fighting the Kushites would hit them when they least expected it. And before the Muslims could organize, they would be gone. And so he talks about some of the injuries that the Kushites inflicted upon the Muslims. And it talks about about 250. So we know that this Muslim force wasn't that large. Maybe 1,000, 1,200 men. That of the Muslim force, 250 of them had severe eye injuries because of the excellence of the Kushite archers. So Kush avoided being conquered at the very outset. It will get incorporated later on, but the initial Muslim advance into Kush or Nubia is not successful. And Amr al-As tells his cousin to come back to come back into Egypt. In 646, Alexandria is captured. And that pretty much gives the Muslims control of Egypt. And they will hold it for a long, long time. But one of the things to remember about Egypt that doesn't happen with other areas of Africa when Islam moves into them. Arabic culture gets into Egypt in terms of, so when the Muslims go in who are Arab, they stay there. Many of them don't go back into the Arabian Peninsula. And like one person has alluded to, what do they take with them? They take their culture, and more importantly, they take the language. And over time, it's several decades before there are more Muslims in Egypt than Christians. Several decades. It's not a real fast process of the indigenous population embracing Islam, but it does happen. But one thing that becomes ingrained very quickly is the language and quote unquote what could be called Arab culture. Now, somebody's going to say, well, why didn't you say Islamic culture? Because there's a distinct difference there. Undoubtedly, the Arabs who went were Muslim, and there are things about what they do day in and day out that people are going to watch and see that gives them the characteristics of an Islamic culture. But there are other things, the foods, the way they dress, and these things, and the language, and what that means, that are purely Arabic in terms of ethnicity. And I'm telling you that to say that over eons of time, this is why a lot of Egyptians, even though they reside on the continent of Africa, in a country that's been there and distinguished over eons, consider themselves to be Arab as opposed to being African. Because of that integration that takes place. Okay? Any questions? I hope I didn't go too fast. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Okay. Next week, we'll look at the next area that comes under, in Africa, that comes under Islam's sway, and that's North Africa. Present-day countries of Libya, Algeria, Tunis, and Morocco. They weren't divided as such like this during the time that we're going to look at. All that area was called Al-Maghrib, the West. That's the way it was referred to, the West. The one country that has kept the name Al-Maghrib is Morocco. So when people say, well, they translate Al-Maghrib and they say it means Morocco, it doesn't mean Morocco. Al-Maghrib in the Arabic language means the West. And that area was called the West because it was west of the Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere. Okay, and so we're going to look at that. All right. One of the other things that I hope to do is to give some clarification about who were the Berbers, B-E-R-B-E-R-S. because these are the people that the Arabs are going to come in contact with when they move into North Africa. And keep it in your mind right now, the Berbers aren't Arab. Okay, once again, the Berbers are not Arab. If you're a Berber and you still speak your tongue, it has no affinity with Arabic whatsoever. None. And if we look at the Berbers, then that means the next thing that we have to do is to come to some understanding about exactly who were the individuals called the Moors. Okay? And in this particular instance, not talking about Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish scientists, has nothing to do with this circumstance. But to get some historical understanding about who were these people that were called the Moors. Were they a distinct ethnicity, or were they a group of people by whom, as with other things that happen, they're given the name the Moors? Meaning, like, for example, Muslims in many instances, especially when we get to the Crusades, were called Saracens. 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 There's nowhere in the Hadith literature anywhere of that word being used to describe Muslims. It's something that Europeans came up with. Okay? So those are some of the things we're going to look at. If you have any suggestions or ideas or something else you want me to take a look at, or you want to review, don't hesitate to let me know. The best way, I think, if Sister Zakiya is not opposed, is to just send it to her so she can make a record of it, and then she can pass it on to me. Any questions at all?
No.
Really? It was that good?
Well, I have a question. This period of time you were just discussing, this was after the period of time of Yusuf?
The period of time that I'm discussing, yeah, this is long after Yusuf.
Long after Yusuf, okay.
Long after Yusuf, yeah.
Okay.
Long after Yusuf. A matter of fact, the period of time that I've been discussing was after the death of the Prophet.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, long after. But the point I was making about looking at Yusuf is that Allah tells us in the Quran, that Egypt, we get various narrations or examples. Egypt was very fertile. When other people were, experiencing drought or famine and stuff like that, Egypt was where they would try to get to, to partake of, because Egypt had surplus. And that, So yeah, this is long after the time of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone else at all? Thank you so very much. Jazakallah. I really enjoyed